Hello and welcome to our discussion today. We want to quickly take a look at the global and cultural context of leadership. And we'll be discussing the cross-cultural leadership. We'll look at global leadership competencies. We'll be discussing the CQ or cultural intelligence communication styles, and then how to lead multicultural teams. And then finally, we'll look at the impact of globalization, right? So these will be our touch areas in the discussion. As a form of introduction, it's important to note that in recent times, leadership transcends borders. So if someone is a leader or a leader can find himself in an environment where he is leading a group of people who are not um, from the same country, or a leader can find himself leading a group of people that is not homogeneous. What it means is that you are likely to have people from different parts of the world that are a part of the team that an individual may be leading. So leadership now transcends borders. So in most organizations, you have diverse teams, right? You have teams that are made up of different nationalities of individuals, right? You can have different institutions, and you can also have a variety of goals, global goals for that matter. Okay, so it's important that in recent times, if you hear that someone is leading a group of people, it is possible that the group of people that he's leading may not be just from one country, right? And you hear of several multinational companies. Such multinational companies have leaders who are leading groups of people from all over the world. Okay. And in this situation where a leader has people scattered all around the world, you realize that the success of that leader or the success of the team depends on cultural awareness and responsiveness. Remember that the way people live is different from place to place, from country to country, from nationality to nationality. So if you find a leader that is leading people made up of a large variety of nationals, or you have different countries that are represented in the team, you realize that it's important for that person to have cultural awareness, and he should be able to adapt to the different cultures represented in the team that he or she is leading. 21st century leadership is no longer local, right? It's no longer limited to the local context. It spans continents, different cultures, and different contexts. So it is important that the leader understands how to engage people across the various borders that are represented. Okay, and also be able to adapt to the various cultural landscapes that he or she may be exposed to. All right. So leadership now transcends borders, and it's important that leaders understand this, and they also get to know how to engage the people that they are leading, or how to engage the followers who have varied cultural landscapes, right? So we look at the cross-cultural leadership, right? And then the Hofstede's model. Okay. So the cultural dimensions of leadership, it's a theory that was developed by Gert Hofstede. Okay, Gert Hofstede. And what they did was try to explain the different ways, okay, that cultures impact the people who live in them. So their theory was developed to explain the way different cultures impact the people who live within those cultures. And this theory would help us to explain the cross-cultural leadership concept, right? So, like we said, the Hofstede's model, it was developed, or the theory was developed to help explain why it's important that leadership styles should differ globally. It's important to know that one leadership style may not fit all global contexts. Okay, so the Hofstede's model helps to explain why leadership styles differ globally, right? Where you realize that a leader who is adopting the directive style may thrive in a power distance culture, but when it comes to a culture where there's a bit of freedom, right, that leadership style may not be appropriate, right? So it's important that leaders have cultural insight. That is a foundation that global leaders should have. So the model has 6 dimensions of culture according to Hofstede, right? The first one is power distance, right? Where you realize that the distance between the leader and the subordinate is so wide. You realize that there's a lot of power at play, and you really get to know that this is the leader and that is the follower. Then you also have cultures where you have individualism versus collectivism, okay, where people focus on either individuals and how they work, or the group of people together and how they work. All right. Then the other dimension is where you focus on masculinity against femininity, right? Femininity. All right. Then you also have the uncertainty avoidance culture. And then you have the long-term orientation culture. And then you have the indulgence versus the restraint culture. So you'll notice that for the various contexts, there are 6 dimensions of culture, according to Hofstede, that a leader has to try and work within. So, for example, in places like Asia, right, where you have a high power distance, it's important for the leader to know that for those areas, there's a high respect for hierarchy. Okay, so that people pride themselves in the positions they hold. So if you are working in that context, or if you are a leader in that context, you should know, or you should try to envisage how your followers are going to perceive you. Okay. Then where you have the Nordics, there's a relatively low power distance as compared to those in Asia. So for those places, as a leader, you have to embrace participatory leadership, where you try to bring everybody on board. All right. Unlike in the Asian countries where you may have to use the directive style of leadership because there's a high power distance. And then for places like the US, you have individualism, right? So you notice that a leader in that area should know that your followers are mostly autonomous and they are driven by personal goals. Okay, if you know this as a leader, you would get to understand the people you are working with well and get the results that you need, right? You also have collectivism in Japan. So in Japan, you realize that there's more team cohesion and loyalty rather than in US, where individuals are driven by their personal goals. So what you will notice is that for a leader who has a team of followers scattered all over the world, you should be able to know the culture that persists in the particular area where you have your followers, and then adapt your leadership style to those cultures, right? Okay. So this requires that a leader has some competencies, and for global leadership, it is important that beyond your technical know-how, beyond the skills that you have, you, as a global leader, you also have to be able to develop soft skills, right? And these soft skills are very necessary for you as a global leader. And as a global leader, success means that you are able to navigate ambiguity, right? You are able to embrace differences, and you are also able to lead across different time zones and different mental models. Okay, so to be successful as a global leader requires that you don't just know the job that you're supposed to do. You don't only have to possess the technical skills. Beyond the technical skills, you need to master the ability to embrace differences. Okay, to find your way around ambiguity, and to also work with different time zones as well as different mental models. You have people thinking in different ways, okay, different from what you have as a leader. So, some of the competencies that a global leader needs to have first is adaptability. You need to be able to adapt your leadership style to the various followers that you are likely to encounter as you lead. All right. And then you also need strategic thinking. You should be able to think for the long term and know what is likely to happen as you lead the different groups of people. And then the leader also requires cultural empathy. Remember that the culture of the leader may not necessarily be the same as that of the followers. And it is important that the leader gets to understand how the different cultures play out in the various tasks that he is likely to assign the followers. He also requires emotional resilience, okay, so that where the culture, or where the way of life, or where the way followers do things does not easily align with what the leader believes in, the leader is not affected negatively. All right. So he needs emotional resilience. And then the leader also needs to be ethically aware of the various requirements of the different geographical areas that are represented. So ethically, there's the law that has to be aligned with. Then there are ethics for the various regions. Okay. People believe some things are right and some things are wrong. So the leader should know when an action is considered right in a particular locality and when it is considered wrong in another. So some of the global leadership competencies that every global leader needs is: one, adaptability, strategic thinking, cultural empathy, emotional intelligence, and then ethical awareness. So, how are these global competencies cultivated? Right? It's important to note that the competencies, unlike the trait theories or unlike the characteristics and the traits that some leaders possess, the competencies are such that they are not innate. They are not inherent in the individual. They have to be cultivated. So, for example, if we pick adaptability, adaptability is not something that the leader is born with. The leader has to cultivate adaptability. The leader has to cultivate ethical awareness. The leader has to cultivate cultural um, intelligence, right? So these competencies are not innate. They have to be cultivated. They have to be learned, right? And in most of the cases, they are learned through experience, right? They are learned through the leader's curiosity. And then they are also learned by intentional reflection. So when the leader sits down and thinks about how things are evolving or the way things are going around him or her, then they are able to um, gain understanding into how best to lead, right? So the competencies are built through real world experiences, through curiosity and intentional reflection. Okay, and that is what helps to cultivate these competencies. So for a global leader to grow, or for um a global leader to be able to attain these competencies, first, he requires exposure to the various cultural contexts, and then he also needs to gain experience in working with these groups of people, because that is when they tend to cultivate the competencies, and then from time to time reflect on how things are unfolding. So exposure, the experience, and the reflection, regular reflection, would lead to the leader's growth, right? And as the leader grows, or as the leader cultivates these competencies, then he will be an effective global leader. It is important to note that cultivating the global competencies is not a one-time thing. Remember that culture is dynamic and it keeps evolving. So, in the same way, cultivating global competence is a lifelong learning and adaptation process. The leader never gets to a point where he thinks that he's done learning or he's done adapting to the various cultures, and so that is it. The truth is, by the time the leader has adapted to a particular culture, there's likely to be a change. Okay. And that change will require that he gets to adapt again. So, cultivating the competences is a lifelong learning journey, and it requires continuous adaptation, right? And then, as the leader is exposed to the cultures of different groups of people, the leader tends to sharpen his perspective. Okay, so you will notice that as the leader gets more exposure, then he also gets more sharpened on how best to lead in global contexts, right? Then there's what you call the cultural intelligence. Remember that there's the normal intelligence that we know, right? The IQ. We know of the IQ. That's the intelligence quotient. Then you have the EQ, where you have the emotional intelligence. Now you have the CQ, which is the cultural intelligence or cultural quotient. That is what separates good from great global leaders. So, if a global leader has a high cultural intelligence or has a high cultural quotient, then that leader is a great global leader. Okay, so high cultural quotient or high cultural intelligence enables leaders to build trust, and they are also able to navigate the complexities in multicultural settings. All right. So the higher the leader's cultural intelligence, the higher they are able to find their way around difficulties that come with the various cultural contexts. And for the cultural intelligence, there are four dimensions. You have the cognitive dimension, you have the metacognitive dimension, the motivational dimension, and then finally you have the behavioral dimension. Under the cognitive dimension, you realize that the leader has the cultural knowledge. Okay, he knows what pertains to the various cultural contexts that you'll be exposed to. And then for the metacognitive dimension, you realize that the leader has cultural awareness. So now it moves beyond just knowledge to being aware of the various cultures that are represented. Then the motivational dimension is where the leader has interest in the various cultures and tries to engage or tries to be a part of what is happening around him. Okay, so at the motivational dimension, part, you realize that the leader does not just see himself as an external part, but tries to engage with the various cultures and develops an interest in the cultures. And then at the behavioral dimension, you have a situation where the leader now tries to adapt his behavior to the culture or to the context within which he finds himself in, right? So the cognitive is where there's the cultural knowledge. The metacognitive is where there's the cultural awareness. The leader knows what is happening and is aware of the conditions in which he finds himself in. And then the motivational dimension is where the leader gains interest or tries to engage across the various cultures. And then finally, you have the behavioral dimension, where the leader now develops the ability to adapt his behavior to that of the culture within which he finds himself in. So you realize that cultural intelligence makes the interactions between the leader and his followers smoother and more productive, right? And what this means is that the leader does not try to abandon his identity, right? So cultural intelligence does not say that the leader should forget about his own identity or drop his own identity. What cultural intelligence means is that the leader holds on to his personal identity and then, in addition to that, respects and adapts to the identities and cultures of the other people that he's leading. Okay, so you hold on to your identity, you hold on to your culture, and then you also ensure that you respect the culture of the other people. You don't look down on their culture. You don't disrespect their beliefs, okay? But you tend to adapt to what they believe, not forgetting what you also believe personally, right? So you realize that leaders with cultural intelligence or a high cultural quotient can avoid ethnocentrism, right? So that leader will not just be focused on his own beliefs or what pertains to just his culture, right? So a leader with a high CQ always tries to avoid ethnocentrism. You don't try to, they call it tribalism, right? You don't try to favor a group of people over others just because they belong to a particular tribe or they belong to a particular country or they belong to a particular culture, right? And that leader also tends to adapt communication and behavior. So it doesn't matter where such a leader finds himself, he's able to adapt his communication and behavior to that of the followers, no matter the culture in which they find themselves in. And then that leader is also able to read subtle social cues. So, for a leader who has a high cultural intelligence, when he's among a different group of people and some nonverbal cues are going around, right, he's able to pick them. So sometimes people behave in some way, all right, some mannerism, some facial expressions, some movements of the parts of the body, and all of them mean something. So a leader that has a high cultural intelligence is able to understand some of these social cues, despite the fact that he may not have the luxury of someone explaining to him. He may be able to pick up a few things, especially related to the followers. So, for example, if your followers are hungry or if they are not happy about a situation, there's a way they are going to behave. A leader that has a high cultural intelligence or a high cultural quotient should be able to pick that. Okay, and as you pick it, it makes you a very great leader. And then they are also able to build intercultural trust, right? Leaders who have a high cultural intelligence, they are able to build intercultural trust where different people from different cultures tend to have confidence in the cultures of the other person. Okay, because the leader has been able to bring them together and helps each follower to build trust despite the different cultures that are represented on the team, right? Then we look at high context versus low context cultures. And this is based on Edward Hall's model. According to him, a high context culture is a culture where you have the people being relational, right? They are implicit and more indirect. Okay, so they deal with people in an indirect manner. They are more relational. They build friendships. They try to ensure that everybody is okay, no one is hurt. If they want to say something, they will try and get the right words that will describe exactly how they feel. They wouldn't want to hurt you with their words. Okay, so you can have examples in Japan and some Arab cultures. So you realize that the high context cultures, they are more relational, they are more indirect, and they are more polite because they would want to, even if what they are saying may be harmful, they will try to um say it in a more polite way in order not to hurt the individual's feelings. Then you have low context cultures. In the low context cultures, you notice that relationships are direct, they are factual, and they are explicit. So you realize that for such low context cultures, things are said the way they are, right? So if a leader finds himself in a low context culture, he has to know that a follower may just say what he thinks, the way he thinks it, and not consider how it is presented to the leader. Okay, so you can have some of the cultures like what you have in the US and Germany, right? And in most cases, this can result in miscommunication because, for example, in a high context culture where someone is trying to be very indirect and relational, what exactly has to be communicated may not come out that way because the individual is trying so hard to make it sound nice. And so it may not come out the way it has to be understood by the leader. On the other hand, in a low context culture where you have relationships that are more direct, they are factual, right? And they are more explicit. People say things the way they are. It may be sometimes that the leader may feel insulted because a comment may be passed and it may not really sound polite. Okay, so this is where sometimes the leader has to watch out for miscommunication. And miscommunication most of the times arises based on differing expectations, right? So maybe the leader is from a high context culture and he has followers from a low context culture. There's a high possibility that there will be miscommunication among them. Okay. So for example, if a Japanese pauses, okay, if a Japanese is talking and he pauses, it may mean that he's trying to think about what is being discussed, right? On the other hand, if the someone from America pauses whilst he's talking, it's not like he's thinking about what is being discussed, but it's like it's a feeling of uncertainty where you don't know what will happen or you don't know what to say, or it may even signify weakness. Okay, so depending on where the leader finds himself, okay, the leader has to be able to decode some of these actions so that there would not be miscommunication, right? So if you are talking to someone who is nodding, it's important that you understand what exactly the nodding means. You don't assume that the nodding means the same thing as your culture, right? As what it is in your culture. It's therefore important that leaders are able to know where they are, know where you are. Is it a high context culture or is it a low context culture? If it's a high context culture, then remember that in the high context culture, the stress is on relationship. So the leader has to read in between the lines and be able to communicate well and not be as direct as he may want to be. Try to be polite in the way you present your concerns. And then in a low context culture where relationship is more direct and people tend to say how they feel and they don't try to get the right words to put them in, the leader is also expected to be direct and also be transparent so that there's no miscommunication anywhere. The leader has to ensure that at every time he's actively listening. Okay, so beyond just hearing what the people are saying or beyond hearing what your followers are telling you, it is important that the leader also identifies some um, non-verbal actions that are being used for communication so that uh, the leader can well adapt to the culture within which he or she finds himself in, right? Then we look at teams, how to lead multicultural teams. If we say a multicultural team, then we are referring to a team that is made up of people with more than one cultural background. And multicultural teams, most of the times, offer a very great value. Why? Because they come with different perspectives. So, for one issue that has to be resolved, you realize that you would be having perspectives from various angles. Okay, so multicultural teams offer immense value. However, before the leader will be able to get the best from these multicultural teams, he has to be able to manage them well, manage them with care, because everybody is coming from a different place. They see things differently. They may not understand what the leader is saying when he says it the first time. Okay, some may get it the second time, some may not get it even the third time. So it is important that the leader manages these multicultural teams very well manages them with care. All right. These leaders must be able to balance the global unity, or the fact that all of them are in one group. The leader should be able to balance that unity with the respect for the local identities. Okay, so for example, if I have 10 people on the team and all 10 people are coming from different countries, in as much as the 10 people are a team, and so that is a global unity, the leader should be able to look beyond the team as one and to also respect the individual identities of members of the team, knowing that they all have a different local identity which have to be respected. All right. And some of the challenges in such a team will be: number one, miscommunication, because on the team you have different groups of people, right? You have those that are from the high context cultures and those from low context cultures, all on one team. So you are giving an announcement, and one group of people have accepted what you are saying, and the other group is offended because they feel you did not present your case well. So it's one of the challenges is miscommunication. There's also likely to be conflict, right? So far as you have diverse people and different backgrounds on the team, there's likely to be conflict. And another challenge is the challenge of ambiguity, where a part of your team understands something you have said just the way you want them to understand it, and the other parts are still struggling with what you said, okay, because they do not really understand what it means. So these are some challenges with leading multicultural teams. There's miscommunication, there can be conflict, and there can also be cases of ambiguity. Then you have the opportunities, right? For multicultural teams, you realize that because of their differences, they tend to be very creative and they offer broader perspectives to problems that come up. They are also very innovative. Okay. So a leader should be able to um, manage these multicultural teams very well in such a way that the challenges will be minimized greatly and the opportunities will be maximized. Another thing the leader has to do is to be able to build an inclusive team culture, right? If you have 10 cultures represented on your team, it is important that each member of the team tends to respect and value the other 9 cultures that are also represented. So the followers or the people must feel seen. Okay, so even if it is one person from that country, that individual should feel seen, he or she should feel heard, and it should also feel valued despite the background from which he's coming from. Okay, so people must be heard, they must feel seen, and they must feel valued. And this is how the leader tends to build an inclusive team. So each individual is as important as the whole group. And as a leader, to be able to succeed, you need to create psychological safety, right? So I may be the only Ghanaian on the team, but the leader, who is maybe a South African, should be able to create that psychological safety that will allow me to give off my best in whichever activity or task that is being completed. The leader should also be able to encourage inclusive participation, get people to be involved in what is happening. The task or the work should not revolve around just a few people, but there should be inclusive participation. And then the leader should be able to navigate conflict with cultural sensitivity, right? So as conflicts come and as you try to resolve them, it's important that you are sensitive to the various cultures that are represented, so that the representation, or that individual or follower will not feel that maybe they have been left out or they are not being cared for. So the leader has to be able to navigate conflict or solve problems with cultural sensitivity at the back of your mind, right? And then the leader should be able to recognize contributions fairly. Okay, no favoritisms. People should not be given opportunities more than others are given. Okay, so there should be fairness. And the leader should recognize contributions fairly, because this is what will encourage the followers to keep on giving of their best. But if someone realizes that no matter what I do, my supervisor would not recognize my contribution, they won't even put in any effort. So it's important that the leader or the global leader in building an inclusive team recognizes contributions of followers fairly. Then we have the concept of globalization. Once we say globalization, then you should be thinking about remote or virtual teams, right? You have people who are working for organizations, but they are not there physically, right? That is the product of globalization. Now you have decisions that are made across borders. And once a decision is made, you realize that because of globalization, the impact of that decision will be felt in other geographic areas, because you have people from there represented on the team. Okay. And then because of globalization, you notice that now ethical and cultural challenges have become complex. Why? Because what is right in Ghana may not be right in another country. But because of globalization, you have people working together. So it makes the issues of ethics, all right, ethical standards and culture very complicated. So those challenges tend to be extremely complex. And then it's also important that because of globalization, leaders have to be globally aware and locally responsive. All right. What this means is that the leader should be able to act in one region. And whilst acting in that region, he understands the global ripple effect of the action he is taking, or the decision that has been taken in that specific geographic area. Right. So leaders have to know that, yes, they are leading, right? They are leading in one region. However, decisions that are made in that region can affect other regions on the globe. Why? Because of globalization. So now there's the need for not just local leaderships, but global leaderships. So you have a combination of global and local, right? So the leader has to be globally aware and locally responsive. So if we say the local leader, the leader needs a global mindset plus a local relevance, right? So locally, the leader is relevant, but he knows that for every act or for every task that is done, there's a global effect. So if a leader is able to do this, then we call that person a global leader, right? So he has a global mindset as well as local relevance. And it requires that the leader blends global strategy with cultural sensitivity and tends to respect local practices while maintaining the global vision that he has. Okay, so a local leader should be able to think long term And as he thinks long term, he should also be able to act ethically, right? So the most effective global leaders are those who adapt, and the adaptation is such that you are adapting, but you are not compromising your core values. So the most effective global leaders are those who adapt without compromising their core values. They build bridges between the global and then the local context. Okay, so that is where we are now, where you have local leaders. Okay, or where you should be aiming for local leadership, right? Okay. All right. So, to conclude, it is important to know that in today's world, leadership is globally and culturally embedded. It is important to know this. And according to the Hofstede and Hall models, it is essential to understand the various cultural frameworks. And as you understand these cultural frameworks, they will help the leader to be able to lead effectively, understand the various contexts within which he's leading, and give off his best. It's also important that leaders develop cultural intelligence or cultural quotient, high cultural quotient, and global competencies, right? And we said that the global competencies are not innate, they are learned, they are cultivated, they are developed. So the leader has to ensure that deliberately he develops a high cultural intelligence as well as the required global competencies that will help him or her to lead, right? Then we also said that there's the part where leaders tend to lead diverse teams, and as they do this, they have to do it with empathy. Okay, they have to lead with empathy. And then the leaders have to balance global awareness with local responsiveness. And if a leader is able to do that, we call that leader a local leader, because that leader is balancing global awareness with cultural responsiveness. And finally, it's important to note that leadership is no longer just about influencing people, all right. It is also about influencing across cultures, okay, and across languages, across systems, and across several geographic areas. So it's important that the leader equips himself or herself to lead in this global world. Otherwise, the necessary impact may not be made, right? So what you are supposed to do is to um, use practical examples to explain um, Hofstede's model. Okay, so your practical examples will help us to explain the model further in class. I look forward to meeting all of you soon. Thank you very much, and I'll see you. If you have any questions, jot them down, and as we meet, we will discuss them. Bye bye.